Hey everyone, welcome. This is Baron, and this is a video about the Baron. Sort of. My username actually isn't a reference to the Baron helmet. Actually, it's a reference to the song The Last Baron by Mastodon, but I've always loved the concept of that Baron helmet, and now that we have its main effect baked right into an ascendancy, it was beyond any shadow of a doubt that I was gonna put together some kind of Puppeteer build, and here it is. I'm going to be talking about my Runic Skeleton Spectre Puppeteer, a build that would not be possible without the ascendancies from this Phrecia event, and a build that will not be possible again until and unless Grinding Gear Games adds these 19 ascendancies to the core game. Let's do a map showcase, then dive into what the build is all about. So feel free to skip ahead using the timestamps down below if you just want to get into the details. So, for the map showcase, we're just going to be running one of the strategies that I've been running recently, which is a divination scarab of the cloister strategy. We do 5 of these scarabs with a map with a good layout. I'm going to be doing city squares on this one, but you can do whatever you want. You can do Jungle Valley, Mesa, whatever. The whole point is to just get a bunch of stacked decks by adding a bunch of these Dodri's devoted packs into the map, and the idols I'm using ramp up the pack size, and they give me some rituals, because doing ritual with this will re-summon the Dodri's packs and give you more stacked decks. So let's just dive in and take a look. We got a Delirium Mirror. One or more of my idols makes that Delirium Mirror pretty routine. I'd say at least 50-60% of the time we get a Delirium Mirror. So as you can see, this is a Spectre build. They are running around and taking care of things for me. As you may also notice, I am a prolific over-clicker. This is a Spectre build. I don't need to be doing much clicking at all, but it is a hard habit to break. You just get used to approaching a pack and doing a couple of clicks. So, one of the features of this build is that I have phasing on my flask. One of my flasks, I've got a quartz flask, and I didn't always. I did not design this build with phasing in mind, and just as I played it, it became abundantly clear that I was going to need it. I had this build a little tankier. Great, we got a ritual right by the bosses, we'll do it. A little tankier, I had all 3 tri-elemental flasks for elemental overcap resistances, and it was just really clunky to do this without phasing for a couple reasons. So, I'm not the one dealing damage, right? My specters are. And I need to be able to run into the middle of a pack, both to just get away from things, and also, once I'm in the middle of the pack, to use Convocation, which I've got on my right click, to summon my specters on top of wherever the densest pack of enemies is, like this. Great. And the only other button that I'm really pushing in this build, unless I need to Frostblink out of danger, is I'm using my middle mouse button to cast an Arcanist Brand. And that Arcanist Brand, it's got a Desecrate, Spirit Offering, and Vulnerability set up on it. Now, a lot of people would have done that with their wand. You can do an auto trigger craft for those 3 things on your wand, and there's a couple reasons I didn't. Honestly, the main reason is I crafted a really good wand that happened to not have a good open suffix, and I was just like, okay, well, we're doing this now. But it turns out that I don't mind the extra button press. I think the main advantage, if you could get vulnerability as a suffix, as a trigger suffix, would be sometimes when you cast Arcanist Brand, it takes it a second to go through, to attach to an enemy, to cast the spells, so not everything is going to have vulnerability right away. On the other hand, if you've got it as a trigger craft on your wand, it's going to be casting every 8 seconds, so you're not going to get it that often anyways. So, trade-offs. In any case, as you can see, the build is fairly tanky. I'm just wandering into packs. This is a T16 map, a lot of projectiles. there are plenty of mods that you don't want to do. Obviously, this is a physical damage build for my minions, so you don't want to do physical reflect. I've noticed that doing maps with monsters' projectiles chain extra, when you've got a bunch of minions, that can actually hurt your minions a lot when the projectiles start chaining between them en masse. So that's one that I'm trying to be careful with. It's both about protecting me, the character, and also protecting my specters, which we'll talk about a little bit, but you don't want them dying, suffice to say. This is not a build with temporary minions like skeletons or summon raging spirits where you're just casting new ones every few seconds. You've got your specters and you're sticking to them. So you can see at the upper left of my screen, I've got 8 specters in one setup and 1 in another. That's a little bit of a unique thing. We're going to talk about why I did that. Okay, sorry. Moving through. I do have my loot filter set up to pick up some unique items that don't have terrible dust values for the Settler's mechanic. So I did just frost blink out of that pack of stuff and then convocate my minions along back with me. So that's a point worth raising. I don't have my convocation on automation, on automate setup. So some people will do that. They will have convocation, which teleports your minions to you. They'll have it on automation, so it just goes off every couple seconds. There's a few reasons why I don't like that setup here. Number one, your minions might be out there doing damage, doing fine, and you don't want them convocating back onto you every couple seconds if they're dealing with a tough enemy. Just like let them deal with a tough enemy. But also, I'd like to be able to use convocation for both offensive and defensive positioning. Defensive, if I see a really big explosion about to go off, yeah, my specters are pretty tanky, but, oh, we've got 4 altars. Let me just, do I need to take any of these? No, I'll just reroll this. Sure. Yeah, why not? I think that's got a good dust value. Great. So offensive and defensive positioning for your specters. Again, my specters are tanky. They're not immortal. I don't love taking them into T17 maps. There's just some mods that can delete them real quick. Maybe if you beefed up the defenses on them. But this is more of a T16 build, frankly. I don't love taking them into T17s. But the other non-defensive, not just to get them out of explosions, just in case, which you can see I'm doing every now and again here, but offensively, to kind of use my phasing to jump into the middle of a pack and teleport all my minions on top of me. Suddenly they're dealing a bunch of damage to everything around them. Okay. Great. So as you can see, the main point of this strategy is just getting the stacked decks. And I've gotten some bonus stacked decks from the minion or the monsters being resummoned by the ritual altars. I typically get more than that. It depends on the pack size of your map. Ideally, you would run this with 8 mod corrupted maps, and frankly, I'm just being lazy. Frankly, I'm being too lazy to buy them. I've got plenty of currency to buy them. Yeah, let's do this one. But the pack size on 8 mod corrupted is just so much better. So we're about done with this map. I think we've got just about everything here. So let's hop back to town. I'm not going to do the expedition. I might sometimes for fun, but I haven't spec'd into it at all. How many stack decks did we get? 20, 40, 55? That's about average. So this strategy yields 35 to 65, 35 to 75 stack decks on average. You know, going below 35 would be pretty crazy, and going above 75 would be pretty crazy with this strategy. So let's hop back into town and talk a little bit more about the build itself. So I played around when I was designing this. I did a ton of messing around. I played around with a bunch of different Puppeteer build possibilities, and truth be told, I'm probably not done playing around with those yet, because I think this is a great ascendancy. There's a lot of fun to be had here, but the build that I settled on, this one here, let's open this up, it takes advantage of an interaction that we could not have done before. Again, this is Legacy of Phrecia event specific until and unless GGG adds this class to the main game. So you may not know it, but there is actually a Spectre build out there that takes advantage of strength stacking. And the reason you wouldn't know about it is that these days, if you are running a strength stacking minion build, you are running the Baron Helmet. If you're unfamiliar, the Baron Helmet grants half of your strength, your character strength, to your minions, among some other beneficial effects. And then, on the other hand, the Wraithlord helmet, which I'm wearing here, this effectively doubles the number of specters you can have and raises the gem level of the specters, at the cost of not being able to run non-specter minions, replacing your normal gem sockets with abyssal sockets, whatever. But these two helmets, the Baron for strength stacking and Wraithlord for specters, they're clearly in direct competition with one another. You can't wear two helmets at the same time. So, until this Legacy of Phrecia event, it wasn't possible to run a build that was both strength stacking and raise specter focused, not without giving up a massive amount of efficiency and a massive amount of damage. However, now that we have the Puppeteer's Rotting Might ascendancy node, this is the one that replicates the Baron's effect of granting half of your strength to your minions, this build is officially on the table. You can effectively dual wield helmets. The Baron can sort of coexist with the Wraithlord helmet. Now, I do think it would be fun to run a build that used both the Rotting Might ascendancy and the Baron helmet, but it's confirmed that the effect stacks. If you use this and you use the Baron helmet, you get not half but 100% of the strength added to your minions. But this build was interesting enough to give it a try, even though we're only getting half the effect, so to speak. The Wraithlord helmet should more than make up the difference in damage for only contributing half the strength. So what are we talking about? What is this build all about? Well, for starters, we should back up and talk about specters in general. Just a little bit, if you're not familiar, if you haven't run specters before, specters are a particular type of permanent minion that come with some big drawbacks and some big advantages. Now, the classic way that you would obtain a specter for most of Path of Exile's history was that you would equip this skill gem and you would cast the skill on the corpse of an enemy monster, creating a copy of that enemy monster that fights for you, and it works just like a minion. It scales with all your normal minion effects, minion life, minion damage, all that good stuff, minion speed. And this is fun because it provides a lot of variety. So the Spectre retains a lot of the characteristics from its origin monster. Health multipliers, spells, buffs, damage types, attack patterns, all that kind of stuff. And that means that there are a lot of different possible Spectre builds out there that don't really resemble one another. If you load up PoE.Ninja and look for Spectre builds, you're going to see a ton of different stuff. You're going to see ones that focus on lightning damage, on cold damage, on physical damage, all kinds of different stuff. You have to play and work the build differently. So that's fun. That's one of the good things about this skill, in my opinion, is the variety. And then also good, just the fact that permanent minions in Path of Exile, they're just so much smoother and more convenient than something like, I said, skeletons or summon raging spirits that have to be constantly resummoned every few seconds. On the other hand, it's not all good news with specters. On the flip side, there are Path of Exile, particularly Path of Exile 1, has some old-fashioned clunky minion summoning mechanics, and it's particularly clunky in the case of specters. We also have a potentially high cost if one of the specters is killed. And to understand that, and to understand the drawbacks in general, it's important to talk about some specter-specific mechanics and the two primary ways that you summon specters. So the first thing to know is that if one of your specters dies to enemy damage, its corpse does not linger to be immediately resummoned. You have to find another original copy of the corpse. As I mentioned previously in Path of Exile's history, there was only one way to summon a specter. You went to an area of the game, a campaign area, a map, some outside of map area, some area that contained the type of monster that you were looking for, and you either track down and kill that monster and raise the specter off its corpse, or you can use the Desecrate spell. And the Desecrate spell creates a bunch of corpses on the ground around you, and it respects the area that you are in. It will create corpses of a type that would exist in the area that you are in. You could also have a friend come to your hideout and use Desecrate if they have a particular specter that you want, and you can raise it off of that. That's clunky, clearly. There are, throughout the game, throughout the acts, there are some popular monsters that are used as support specters and as main DPS specters. You can find them in X 2, 5, 7. You can find them in certain heist areas, some harvest monsters, among others. But that is only one way of raising specters, from killing the monster or using Desecrate. Another way was introduced relatively recently. So in Affliction League, which was not so long ago, the concept was introduced of itemized corpses for special types of monsters, and you can use these to create specters. So you can acquire and use one of these itemized corpses. You right-click on it from your inventory. It creates a corpse on the ground, and you can use that to create a specter. You could use it to do something else, like detonate it, but that would be pretty stupid since you do have to pay for these. So these are primarily used just for specters. And these are monsters that you can't get anywhere else. These are not like replicating something that you go and find. These are purchase only. Originally they came from the Affliction mechanic. Nowadays you get them from the Ritual mechanic. And they are desirable because they come with potent effects attached to them, and as a result they've kind of taken over a large part of the specter, the build meta. So if you look out there, there are a lot of specter builds that use one or more of these special purchasable consumable corpse items. So many of the different types of these new corpse items will give you an aura. One of the auras, like one of the big boy auras, the 50% auras: haste, determination, zealotry, grace. So that's a big bonus all by itself. The corpses also come in 3 types: imperfect, normal, and perfect. And the normal and perfect versions of these will often come with some kind of secondary benefit on top of the aura, if the original monster granted that, that is associated in some way with that aura. So like, for example, what's an example? The monster that gives determination will also provide a buff that gives you more physical damage reduction, or the monster that gives the zealotry aura for lightning damage, that will make your lightning damage lucky. Stuff like that. Thematically relevant stuff. You get the idea. There are some other ones, though, ones that don't give auras at all. So, like, I love the Perfect Dark Marionette. Here's one that doesn't give an aura. Its special bonus effect is that it resummons itself moments after it dies. So this is handy not just because you don't have to go ahead and buy that corpse again if your minion dies, but also because it enables some cool builds where you're deliberately, intentionally killing your minions, and then it just resummons itself. You don't have to go and click anything or find anything. There are also just some of these corpses that are generically good DPS, but we're not talking about any of those. We're talking about a specific one, and we are talking about the Perfect Runic Skeleton. That is the one that I am using in this build. So actually, I say Perfect Runic Skeleton, but actually, unlike almost every other type of itemized corpse, we actually don't care if we get the perfect version or just the normal version, because while most versions of these itemized corpses confer a very important effect when you upgrade from normal to perfect, for the Runic Skeleton, it's just okay. We don't really care about it. It gives the user, the player, our character, more physical damage, but this build isn't scaling our damage, we're scaling minions. So you could actually, if for whatever reason these specters were ever to get expensive, you could just go with a normal version. In fact, You could even go with the lowest tier, the imperfect version. The bonus that comes from going from imperfect to normal, it's okay. It's inflicting what's a debuff called crush on hit, which causes, you know, enemies will take some more physical damage. It's not a crazy DPS boost. Actually, for this type of Spectre, the effect that we're interested in, the build defining effect, is baked into all versions of this Spectre. And let's talk about it. So the real power of this Spectre, or maybe I should say the real strength of this Spectre, it comes from the important text. It reads 20% increased physical weapon damage per 10 strength. So that's per 10 strength that the minion has, and by default the minion will have no strength. You have to give the minion strength somehow. And it's hard to overemphasize how crazy that number is. So it says 20% increased weapon damage per 10 strength. So as a reminder, normal your character strength scaling for all Path of Exile characters is that it provides 1% increased melee physical damage per 5 strength. In other words, to put them on the same terms, this minion is doing 20% increased weapon damage per 10 strength. We, as characters, would get 2% per 10 strength. Even if you are using the Iron Fortress body armor, whose entire purpose is to boost this strength damage scaling, that only raises it to 3% per 10, 2% per 10, 3% per 10, 20% per 10. So this means that the skeletons have scaling with strength that is literally 10 times as good as normal player strength scaling, and it is almost 7 times better than scaling if you're using the Iron Fortress, which is specifically intended to make it better. So basically this is crazy, and although we're only giving half of our strength to our minions because we're only using this Rotting Might ascendancy, we're not using the Baron, even then our minions are getting a lot out of this. 20% increased phys per 10 strength. So that pretty much takes care of the increased damage portion of the damage calculation. Let's use that to jump off and start by talking about where else they are getting their damage from, and then let's talk about the build's defensive layers, and then we'll wrap it up just talking about some of the content that it can do. So as you may know, in the Path of Exile damage calculation, it is important to have multiple vectors of damage. You have flat added damage, like that, just that base number that everything else is based on. You have increased damage, which multiplies on top of the flat. Then you have more multipliers, which multiply not only, they don't just multiply on top of the increase, they multiply with each other. So more multipliers are particularly strong. Then you've got other stuff. You've got speed, you've got increased damage taken and curses and reduced resistances and all this other stuff. So how are we doing it in this build? Well, clearly the Runic Skeleton's effect of increased damage per strength, that pretty well wraps that section up. As long as you're scaling strength, which we are, of course, that just leaves us to work on the flat damage, the more damage, and then some crit and some other vectors. So let's talk about them. Well, the flat damage has actually a pretty straightforward source in this build. We're already going to be using the Wraithlord helmet. It gives us double the number of available specters effectively, so double the amount of damage. Well, it comes with another effect as well. It's a downside that we lose access to the normal gems that would go in our helmet. It makes us pretty gem starved, but we get access to 4 abyssal jewel sockets. We can also put abyssal jewels in our belt, on our tree, and everywhere else, and abyssal jewels can come with this modifier: minions deal X to Y additional physical damage. That is flat physical damage that contributes directly to the baseline of our damage, upon which everything else is multiplied. So I've got that everywhere. I've got that on all 4 of my Wraithlord Abyssal Jewels. I've got it in my belt. I've got it all over my tree. So we get a lot of flat damage from that. We also get a lot of flat damage from scaling the gem level of Wraith Spectre, and we are doing that in a variety of ways. So I'm getting 1 from a support gem. Awakened minion damage is giving +1. I'm getting another 1 from my weapon, and I'm getting another 2 from my helmet. So that's adding some flat physical damage as well. On top of that, so we've talked about flat, we've talked about increased from the skeleton's effect itself. Let's talk about more multipliers. So you generally get more multipliers from your support gems, and in this case, awakened minion damage is also giving us some more damage, and on top of that, we multiply. Yeah, we've got item rarity in there. So yes, the map showcase is actually shown with at best a 5 link because I was using item rarity, which gives me no damage. Sorry, quick aside there. We're also getting more damage from awakened melee fizz. If you have more red sockets, you can use awakened brutality, which is another more damage multiplier. I've got awakened melee splash here. This is another one. It's doing good stuff for our clear, but it's not adding any single target damage at all. So what I've got over here are my couple swap ins. So I would swap in for item rarity, increased critical damage support, and I would swap in for awakened melee splash, multistrike. Or if I was obscenely, obnoxiously rich, I would swap in awakened multistrike. But seeing as how awakened multistrike costs about as much as the entire rest of the build put together, I don't have one of those, but you could if you wanted. And again, if you had like a third red socket, you could do that brutality, which has a more damage multiplier. So let's see, is there anything else that looks at the more damage multiplier? I don't think so. So let's then talk about critical strikes. And actually, this ascendancy has a great bonus for critical strikes, and it is the Feeding Frenzy node. It reads, minions base attack critical strike chance is equal to the critical strike chance of your character main hand weapon. The minions are aggressive line, that is an underrated but potent offensive benefit. The minions will rush off screen, and if I cast anything like casting my Arcanist brand, they'll like run after that, and they'll go seek out stuff to fight, and their radius of seeking it out is further out. So that's an underrated bonus, but the real thing we're talking about here is the base attack critical strike chance. So minions typically have a very difficult time scaling critical strike chance. They have a low base crit. But here, we're entirely replacing their base crit with whatever our weapon is, even if we're not using a melee weapon. I'm using a wand, but I've boosted up my base crit using a, see that 37% increased critical strike chance. If that mod is on a weapon, that is not global. That is specific to the weapon, which is way more powerful. So we start with 11.78 critical strike chance base, and everything else is multiplied on top of that. That is super powerful, super potent. I am also using boots that allow me to drop brittle ground, which I think adds 5% to base crit as long as the enemy is standing on that little section of brittle ground. That's another reason why it's really good to have phasing in this build, to be able to run back and forth across the enemy without getting interrupted and make sure they've got brittle ground underneath them. But even if you can't get the brittle ground underneath them, having between 12 and like 17 base crit is amazing. We're going to multiply that by some other sources. We're going to multiply that the chance by things like minion critical strike chance, fearsome force. We have crit strike multi to boost up what we do, and we do get that crit. Ultimately, we wind up with above 50% critical strike chance for minions, which is amazing. It's normally very difficult to get high crit with minions. We don't achieve 100, but that would be extremely difficult to do without gimmicks. And then we've got some miscellaneous sources of damage on top of the crit. We've got Grave Pact is giving us a chance at double damage. We've got a lot of attack speed, so we want our minions attacking as fast as possible. So actually, this is a good time to mention, even though the max number of specters in this build is 9, I am not running 9 runic skeletons. In fact, I'm only running 7. I subtracted 1 for offensive purposes and 1 for defensive. We'll talk about the defensive in a second, but the one that I subtracted for offensive purposes is actually this separate specter setup. So you see how there's one of these off to the side? There's a couple reasons for that. One of the stupid reasons is, well, it's nice to be able to see a health bar, frankly. And grinding gear games, it would be nice if we could see a health bar for our specters if there's more than one of them. But this is just a silly little side benefit. It is nice, though. If I see this guy's health spiking down, I can get everybody out of dodge. I can convocate them out of the way. But realistically, I have this separate specter setup because I am using it to summon what's called a perfect forest tiger. These are expensive specters, also of the, itemized corpse type, and they're powerful. So also they have lower base life than other specters. So all in all, I want them protected. I don't want them hooked up with awakened minion damage, which would lower their life. Actually, I want them hooked up with minion life, which will raise their life. I want them hooked up with meat shield, which reduces the amount of damage they take. And it's also, again, nice to be able to see their health bar. So the perfect forest tiger, I want to protect it because he's expensive and he is very important. He grants the haste aura to make all of the attacks faster, and he grants my minions and me frenzy charges, which makes the attacks even faster on top of that. So it's really important that I keep this guy alive, hence the separate spectre setup. It's not like having a separate setup is letting me bypass the limit of 9. I'm still beholden to the same limit of 9 specters. I just get, I get the benefit of having him linked up to different support gems. Let's see, what else is important? Yeah, just some other ancillary damage. I'm getting physical damage from the Pride aura, the Vulnerability curse. I'm also, let's check this out, kind of a unique measure here. I don't think it's anywhere else in the game. This Ennerveting Presence node. So this says nearby enemy monsters have 20% of life reserved. And the neat thing about this is that, as far as I can tell, I've tested this a bunch, it looks like that 20% life just gets chunked away, deleted, the instant an enemy is within range of our character. And unless that enemy has some kind of crazy life regen or leech, if we exit the zone where we're causing it to reserve life, we're not instantly healing it back, that 20. That 20% is gone unless they can heal it back. So as long as our specters are out there dealing damage, we've just effectively done a reverse culling strike, right? So culling strike is 10% off the final 10% HP of an enemy. This is 20% off the first HP of an enemy. It kind of reminds me of the Witch Hunter in Path of Exile 2. Anyways, you could actually pair this up if you wanted with true Culling Strike. So 20% off the first part of their health, 10% off the last part of their health. Suddenly the enemy only has 70% health, right? Well, I had Cull in this build. I had it hooked up to this Fallen Shield so that it would cast on block, that trigger a socketed elemental spell on block. I liked it. It was good. I just couldn't fit it in, man. This, because of the fact that the helmet is taking our normal gems away from us, this is a very gem-starved build, and I just couldn't find space for Culling Strike. If you can find it, that's amazing. Let me know. But I had to make way for other stuff. I think that's about it on offenses. Let's talk about defenses. And frankly, this is one of the main reasons that I put this build together. This is not an immortal build, but you saw it. It is damn tanky in T16 maps. Yes, I can die, but I'm level 98, and I've just been grinding this out, doing like Harbingers and Cloister Scarabs and stuff. And it's pretty damn tanky. I'm frankly more worried about my minions than about me. I do rely on Svalin to get up to effective with Lucky Block, 90% attack and 90% spell block. I've also got overcapped elemental resistances, and I've got actually endurance charges courtesy of our final Spectre. So I mentioned that I set aside one Spectre for extra offense, the Tiger, and now I've got one Spectre for extra defense as well, the Perfect Warlord. So he grants a vitality aura. It's very low level. It was a higher level back in Affliction League when he first launched. But the main thing you take him for is because he grants you endurance charges. Now, we could do better. His endurance charge gain, I'm happy to have it. I'm very happy to have it for my minions. For me, it's only sporadic. Sometimes he's not in range. Sometimes my Immortal Call goes off, which this is a great combo. Immortal Call will consume endurance charges to make itself better, but it does consume the endurance charges. And if that Perfect Warlord is off somewhere else, you might not get them back for a little bit. It might leave you a little bit vulnerable. So it would be nice if we could fit in Enduring Composure as a small cluster passive on the build, and I think that would smooth out endurance charge generation. But overall, the defenses are pretty good. I think the only thing that I'm dissatisfied with is how I'm using my energy shield. So if you've been looking, maybe you noticed the energy shield number compared to my life number is weird. I don't have an equal number, and I don't have just like a little bit of energy shield. I've got a solid chunk of my HP is tied up in energy shield, but I don't rely on it. It's not like energy shield is my main pool. So I'm in an awkward kind of limbo. This happened to me before a few leagues ago when I was running my Pyroclast Mine Saboteur. I just wound up with a bunch of energy shield that like it acts as a nice little buffer, but it's not like I'm scaling it super hard. The best that I could do is I took Divine Shield, cannot recover energy shield to above armor, and 3% of physical damage prevented is regenerated as energy shield. The reason this works so well for us, frankly, is because physical damage prevented, that includes blocked hits. And with Fallen, we're blocking a lot of hits. So we are getting some energy shield regen. It's not like we're doing nothing with energy shield, but we're not really leaning into it. I don't know a good way of leaning into it. We can't use Eldritch Battery, or like we shouldn't, because I don't have mana problems with this build, so it'd be a waste. Honestly, I think the solution is probably to switch everything over to Chaos Inoculation, pure energy shield, switch Fallen out for Aegis Aurora, do that whole shebang. It feels a little overdone. I'm always doing that. I feel like half my builds are Aegis, Purity of Ice, Melding of the Flesh, like, you know, max block, that package, overcap resistances. It's a whole thing. But it might be the best way to go for this build. The trouble is, if you switch to Chaos Inoculation, this Marination node, which is really strong, this is the Ascendancy node Marination, gain 20% of life as extra maximum energy shield, and then minions gain 20% of maximum life as extra maximum energy shield. This, half of it goes to waste if you go Chaos Inoculation. In Path of Exile 1, unlike Path of Exile 2, when you take Chaos Inoculation, you get converted to 1 life before it does any of this calculation right here. So you basically get no benefit from the life as extra ES. It would be 20% of 1 life as extra ES. And so that's why I've been hesitant to go this route. But I think in the end, it might be worth it to go that direction. Just accept that this is basically a minion defensive node. This is giving our minions that 20% extra energy shield, and also it is a gatekeeper to this very potent offensive node, Ennerveting Presence. And maybe I just need to suck it up and deal with that. So, you know, I've been putting a lot of attention and focus into my next build, so I haven't really been upgrading this one for a while. But if I were to upgrade it further, that's probably the direction I would go. Put a Mage Blood on it, get 90% all elemental resistances, get more armor, Aegis, Chaos Inoculation, go that route. Probably do that. But yeah, I think that's about it on defenses. So just in general, the types of content that it can do. So look, this is not a clear speed monster. It's not a beast, but it's quite respectable, and the minions do the work for you. So you can be looting while they're off doing the killing, and that is an underrated clear speed thing if you're picking up even a few things per map. You know, I wouldn't want to rely on this for like Breach or Legion or anything like that. This is not an explodey build, but it is tanky and it is reliable. It does great at Harvest, it does great at Expedition. As you've seen, it does good at Cloister Scarab farming. It's great at Harbingers, all that kind of stuff. T17s probably wouldn't do. You'd really need to focus up on your minion defense, honestly. You'd want to be very confident that your Spectres were not going to die. Those perfect Tiger Spectres, at the moment they're like a divine. Back when they first came out, they were like 8 or 9 divines. It was crazy. So yeah, I would probably stick to tier 17, so it's not perfect, but I'll say the build's a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun with it, and I think that it can do a lot of things very well. I haven't tested it in Delve yet, but I think it could do great in Delve if you wanted to do that. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. Let me know if there's any interest. I'm happy to put out kind of a more in-depth review of like how and why I put the gear together. It's not super complicated. I've just got a bunch of strength everywhere so I can strength stack for the minions. But, you know, let me know if you want a more in-depth guide or anything like that. And in the meantime, that's it for the video. Thank you so much for tuning in, and take it easy.